Today's daf is daf mem beis. The Mishnah says, "Hamudar hanome chavero," so he prohibits his friend with a neder, enjoining his friend from having hanoah from his possessions. So Reuven is the madir, Shimon is the mudar. And the Mishnah is going to distinguish between two scenarios. One is in which this neder was taken before Shvius, before the inception of Shemitah, and the other where it was taken on Shemitah itself, during Shemitah. So first the Mishnah takes up the case of Lifnei Shvius, and the Mishnah says, Eino yored l'soch sadeu. The mudar is enjoined from entering into the field of the madir, because when he walks through the reshus, the domain of the madir of his friend, that's considered hanoah, and it's also b'mudar hanoah. And this is a reflection of the Shita Rabbi Eliezer that we learned about earlier in the Masechet, that even the hanoah of drisas regel in the chutz of his friend or the madir is also prohibited, even though people are not makpid on that. But it's a koldu, it's a hanoah of a minimum size, so to speak. V'eino ochel min hanotos, and he cannot eat from the peros, meaning the mudar that we called him Shimon is not allowed to eat from the fruits of Reuven, these fruits that are on the side, that let's say there's a tree on the borderline that has foliage that crosses beyond the border so that there's no need to enter into the field, but nevertheless, the mudar is not permitted to eat those fruits, because in so doing he'd be having hanoah and benefit from the madir. So that even though he doesn't have to enter into the field because these fruits overlap into the Shus HaRabim, but nevertheless the fruits are still owned by the madir, and the mudar is enjoined from having benefit by eating these fruits from the madir. But now, ubishvius, supposing the neder took place during the Shemitah cycle, when the Torah says that the field is hefker, then on the one hand, Eino yored l'soch sadeu, and the mudar is not allowed to enter into the field, and we'll have to see why. Aval ochel hu min hanetios hanotos, but the fruits do not belong to the madir; they are public property, so to speak, because Shvius Afkata Demalka is mafkir his peros, and therefore the mudar is eating the peros without entering into the field of the madir and enjoying peros of Shvius. He is not in any way enjoying the fruits that are owned by the madir because it's Shemitah. Now, what happens in a case where the neder took place before Shemitah, and now the Shemitah comes and is mafkir his peros? That's the seif of this Mishnah. Nodar himenu machol. If he took a neder that his friend should not enjoy the benefits of achila from the fruits of his field, and when was this neder taken? Lifnei Shvius. So again, at the time that the neder was taken, certainly it was chal, and these peros became asur ben neder to the mudar, to Shimon. But now it's Shvius. Yored l'soch sadeu. The Torah says that a field is open to the public during the 7th year, and the madir cannot claim ownership that would prevent someone from entering into this field. And therefore, he's allowed to enter into the field, and not only because it's Shvius, but also because, in this case, in the Sefer, he was madir himenu machol, eating, so that entering into the field is no longer a problem. V'eino ochel min haperos, if it's erev Shvius, on the 6th, he's not allowed to eat from the peros. But ubishvius, yored v'ochel. When Shvius comes around, then he's allowed to enter into the field and even eat from the peros of the field. Now, we're going to have to add the following comment based on the Ran, and that is that Ubishvius means that the neder was taken on the 7th year itself, and therefore there's no Isa to get off the ground at all, because the Mudar is allowed to eat the payros, he's allowed to enter into the field. The Torah permits him because of the halach of Hefker during Shvius, and everything is mutter. Now, let's go back for a moment and retrace our steps to the Reish of this Mishnah. Hamudar hano mechavero lifnei shvius eno yored letoch sadeu v'eno ochel min hanotos michutz l'sadeh. So since the neder was a full-fledged neder to prohibit hano for the mudar for Shimon, then he can't enter into the field. That would be considered hano, as we said before, according to Rabbi Eliezer. And he certainly can't eat from the peiros, because he's mudar hanof michavero. Now, im hidiro b'shvius, then he's allowed the mudar to eat from the peiros, but he's not allowed to enter into the field. And we're not exactly sure why that's so. You would think that if he took the neder during the course of the Shvius in the 7th year, then the access to the peiros is a free-for-all. The Torah allows anyone to have access, and therefore he's not, and by entering to the field, he's not in any way getting benefit from the owner of the field. But the Mishnah goes on to say that's only in a case where he prohibits hana, but if he was in a situation where he prohibited ochel, and once again, we're talking lifnei shvius, then he's allowed to enter into the field. It says, yored l'soch sadeu, because the prohibition was limited in scope to achila, so that by being nenef from entering into the field, he's not violating the neder, but of course he's enjoined from eating the peiros. So he can use his friend, the madir's field as a shortcut, but he can't eat from the peiros inside. But then the Mishnah goes on to say that if the neder was taken on Shvius, then the mudar hano is allowed, number one, to enter into the field, number two, to eat the fruits of the field. So one would wonder why in the Reisha, when he was mudar hano, would the mudar be enjoined from having access to the field and entering into the field, albeit even if I concede that that's a hana, but nevertheless it's shvius, and in shvius he has no rights over the entry into the field. So that's a question that we're going to have to analyze. Now the Gemara says the following. We have Rav and Shmuel on the one side, and Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish on the other. Rav and Shmuel the Amrit Shavayu. They maintain that nechasim elu olecha, if the formulation, the nusach of the neder was nechasim elu olecha, so the konom is creating an iser in the nechasim, and the neder was taken lifnei shvius, eino yored letoch sadeu v'eino ochel min hanotos. Since the neder took place before shvius, when the sada and the pears growing in the sada belong to the madir to Reuven, the neder is chal. Afal pi shegia shvius. So once the konom was chal on the peros, that konom, that isa that's chal on the chefts of the peros remains even after the peros are removed by virtue of the Torah law of Shvius from the ownership and the possession of the Madir. So it's no longer his. At this point, he cannot impose a neder on his parents, but since he took the neder before Shvius, generating an Iser in the Chefts of the Peros, that Iser remains even after the emergence of Shvius. However, in B'Shvius, not if the neder was taken B'Shvius, then although again we don't know why, but any yored l'toch sodeu aval ochel min haperes hanotos. So those fruits that are growing outside of the boundaries of the field, and therefore they're accessible to anyone even without entering into the field, that the muder is allowed to eat. Meaning that the Baal of the field of the Sod has no rights to prohibit during Shvius an Iser Neder on the Peros when the Torah says they're not your Peros. And now the Gemara quotes the dissenting view of Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, the Amrit Shavayu, Nechasai Olecha, if he takes the Neder on the Nechasim Lifnei Shvius, but he gia Shvius, which we said that according to Rav and Shmuel, once Shvius comes about, the mudar is allowed to eat these peros. But wait a second, that was only in the case where what? Where he took the neder before Shvius. I'm sorry, he took the neder during Shvius. Now, what's going to be the deal according to Rav and Shmuel if he took the neder before Shvius? Now it's Shvius. We said Afal Pishi Gia Shvius. The Iser in the Chefta of the Peros continues to exist. So where is the point of contention of Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish? So I have a suspicion that we should emphasize the fact that the nusach of the neder, as formulated by Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, is nechasai olecha, which means he didn't say nechasim elu, but rather he said nechasai olecha. It's my fruits. And therefore, Yigia Shvius ochel es hanotos. He's allowed to eat the peros. It's not 100% clear that Rav and Shmuel would reject the shita of Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish in a case of nechasai olecha, because the emphasis on nechasai indicates that the neder should only be binding as long as it is nechasai, and should terminate once his bailus terminates. So when we go back to the Mishnah, and the Mishnah uses the term lifnei shnas hashvius, which means that he took the neder, the Madir took the neder before Shvius came about. And when the Mishnah says ubeshvius, meaning after Shvius arrived, even if he took the neder beforehand, then certainly, according to Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, the Mishnah would allow, with the onset of Shvius, for the mudar to have benefit from. Let's go back to Rav and Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel would maintain that since he took the neder before Shvius and there's a chalos iser in the chefts of the peros, they remain also even after Hagos Shvius. And therefore, when the Mishnah is matir b'shvius, that's only in a case of nadar b'shvius. Whereas according to Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, the Mishnah would be matir even if he took the neder before shvius, because once shvius. But excited, we explained it, which again we're jumping to the Masechet of the Gemara. The Gemara doesn't know this now, that The difference is because Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish talked about a different formulation of the neder, where he said nechasai. The Gemara thinks lema b'haka miflagi, that there's a machlokas between Rav and Shmuel on the one hand, Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish on the other. Rav Shmuel Savri Adam Ose Davish B'Shusa Filuch Sheyetze Mershuso. A person could engender a Chaloshem Iser Nechefza, and that Chaloshem Iser remains even after the object, and in this case the Peros, left his Rishus. And therefore, if he was noder before Shvius, generating an Iser Chefza inherent in the Peros, that Iser Chefza remains even after the onset of Shvius. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish Savri, Ein Odom Osa Dover Shebeshuso L'Chiyetze Beshuso. Even though now it's mine, I cannot impose an Iser that would be Chal even after my Rishus, my Bailus is Paka. And the Gemara says, V'tizbara, is that interpretation of the machlokas really correct? Mi kol aman diyomer ein adam osa davar shebeshuso sheyetze meshuso. Is there really an opinion that would deny the lumdus, the concept and principle that once you created an isa lechefza, that isa remains even after your rishus is paka? Because in Cain, if it's true that, as you formulated, Rav and Shmuel would insist that the Iser is Paka, I'm sorry, Rav and Shmuel, the way we're interpreting it now in the Havamina, would insist that the Isur, just 1 second, sorry, I apologize. I mentioned Rav and Shmuel. I meant to say Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan would insist that even though the Isur was Chal in the Chefza when it was his, nevertheless, the Isur is Paka after it leaves his Rishus. And the Gemara says in Cain, if that's the case, Nifligu, why didn't the Amoraim formulate the Machlokes b'nechasim elu? That even in the case of Nechasim Elu, we didn't mention his bailus over the Nechasim. Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish would insist that the Isa is Paka with the onset of Shvius. And then we would have understood the Kolshkein in the case of Nechasai, where he mentions my bailus. But instead, Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish only mentioned their Chiddush that the Isur is Paka in the case of Nechasai, implying that if he had not mentioned Nechasai in the formulation of his neder and emphasized his ownership over the Nechasim, if he just would have said Nechasim Elu, then even Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish would agree that the Isur is Paka. Right, it seems that Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish are putting the emphasis on the word Nechasai. That's why the Isur is Paka and Shvius. Why didn't Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish tell me a bigger chiddush? That even in the case of Nechasim Elu, where he didn't mention his bailus, once the Isur is Chal in the Chefta, despite that, the fact that the Isur Chal is in the Chefta, once it leaves his Rishus, it's Paka with Shvius. Visu, and furthermore, Hod Tnan, we have a Mishnah Baba Kama Kuf Ches, the Adam Ose Dover Shebeshuso Sheyetze Meshuso. We're going to prove from a mission of Bava Kama that a person can generate an Isur, and that Isur, once it's Chal, continues to exist even after his Bailus is Parka. This now we learned in the Mishnah, Ha'omer libno, a man says to his son, Arini oser alecha b'Isur konom es kol mashaton nene li. Meaning he asks upon his son a neder not to get hana from him. And that Isur is only chal during the lifetime of his father, but mess with the death of the father, Yerashena, the ben inherits his father. Unless the father adds b'chayav ubimoso. He says explicitly that he's answering the nechasim on his son, both during his own lifetime and even after his death.